There is a voice inside most people that no friend would ever be allowed to use, and yet it runs almost continuously. She wakes at 3 in the morning. The room is dark and the house is quiet in the way that houses are only quiet at that hour, when there is no ambient noise left to muffle what rises from inside you. And what rises is a voice, not a shout, a voice like something cold and certain and very, very patient. It says, "What's the use of trying?" It says, "Nothing will change." It says, with a kind of exhausted finality, "You are hopeless." She lies there and she listens, because she has been listening to it her whole life. Here is the strange part. She thinks these are her thoughts. She has always thought they were her thoughts, that this is simply what is true about her, what she knows about herself in the honest moments when nobody is watching and she cannot keep the story going. The voice does not feel like an intrusion. It feels like clarity, like the real assessment she has been too cowardly to face in daylight. And so, she does not argue with it. You do not argue with your own mind. But the voice is not done. It moves, the way water moves through a house when a pipe has burst, finding every low place. It tells her that the people she loves will leave, not might, will. It runs the numbers. It points out everything she did last year, last month, last week, that brought this outcome closer. It whispers that she had something good once, and she ruined it by being what she is, by not being able to stop being what she is. The calculations are meticulous. The cruelty is almost impersonal, which is somehow worse. It isn't angry. It's simply reporting. She has never told anyone this happens. It would sound like madness. And anyway, she believes it is just her. There is a part of every person that psychologists call the unconscious. Everything happening inside you that your conscious mind has not yet reached, like the part of the building you have never been given a key to, but whose sounds come through the walls at night. And in that part, in the dark of it, something learned to speak in her voice. It learned which words would land. It learned the exact pitch of her deepest fear. It has been doing this since long before she can remember. Quiet in daylight, merciless when the lights go out. By morning, she will have half forgotten it. She will be functional and even kind. She will smile at the people she loves and not mention that at 3 in the morning, a voice told her they were already gone. The voice does not feel foreign. It feels like her own thoughts. And that seamlessness, that total lack of seam, is exactly the problem she does not yet have words for. That seamlessness is where the real story begins, because the voice is not her. It only sounds like her. Notice what the voice actually does when it speaks. It does not stumble. It does not hedge. It does not say, "I wonder if," or "maybe sometimes." It pronounces. It arrives at 3 in the morning with conclusions already formed, evidence already sorted, verdict already signed. Nothing will change. You are hopeless. They will leave. These are not questions it is working through. These are opinions it has held for a long time, and what you are hearing at 3 in the morning is simply the hour when the rest of the noise drops away and the pronouncements become audible. That is the first thing to understand about what was happening to her. Inside every person there lives what you might call a hidden counterpart, a figure that carries the qualities the conscious self does not. In a woman, this counterpart tends to carry a certain quality of judgment, of assertion, of cold, impersonal logic. In a man, it runs differently, more like a demoralizing weather system, a mood that settles in and drains the color from everything, a voice that says nothing matters, and you have no idea why you suddenly believe it. But in both cases, when this inner figure turns against you, it does not argue. Arguments can be answered. It pronounces, and its pronouncements have a very particular shape. They are general, where your life is specific, absolute, where your situation is actually mixed, and they almost always reach for the words never and always and hopeless, because those words do not leave room for the exception that might rescue you. She could feel this in the way the voice moved through her. It was not responding to the actual facts of her week. It was not curious about the complexity of what had happened between her and the people she loved. It gathered everything that had ever gone wrong and arranged it into a single sweeping conclusion, which it then delivered as though reading from a document. That quality, the slightly beside-the-point certainty, the general truth that does not quite fit this specific life, is the tell. It is not thinking, it is pronouncing, and what pronounces inside you with that kind of cold confidence is not your honest assessment. It is something else wearing your voice. But where does it get its material? This is where you have to understand something about the locked room inside you, the part that carries everything you decided, long ago, was too dangerous or too shameful to let into the light. The aggression you were punished for as a child and learned to swallow. The ambition someone told you was arrogance, so you buried it and called yourself humble. The grief you were told was weakness, so you performed composure until composure became a kind of armor you forgot you were wearing. None of that disappears. It collects, in the dark, in the room you have not been back to. And the shadow is not empty, as people sometimes imagine. It is crammed. It is full of the discarded, the denied, the things that got locked away not because they were small, but because they felt too large and too dangerous to carry openly. The inner critic speaks from that room. It knows exactly which words to use, because it grew up on the things you refuse to own about yourself. The shame it speaks in is the precise shape of the shame you once absorbed from someone else and then turned inward. It knows where to press, because it is made of the very material you tried hardest to keep from yourself. And the reason it has become so established, so fluent, so seemingly permanent, the reason it feels less like an intrusion and more like bedrock truth, is that it has had time to do something that old wounds do when they are left alone long enough. A complex is what an old wound becomes when it grows a voice. It is no longer just a memory that hurts. It is a splinter of personality that argues back, has opinions, and knows exactly which moment to speak up. The first time someone important to her looked at her and communicated, in whatever way adults communicate these things to children, that she was too much or not enough, that was the wound. But the wound did not stay a wound. It organized. It developed a point of view. It acquired a face and a tone and a preferred hour of night. And now it sits behind her sternum like a small, cold authority that she has been consulting, without meaning to, for most of her life. The ego, the part of her that manages daily life, the one who goes to work and plans dinner and keeps track of what people think of her, the part that holds her name. That part cannot always tell the difference between its own thoughts and the complex speaking. The ego is not the whole of who she is. It is the part that runs things moment to moment. And when the complex has been running long enough, when its voice has become sufficiently familiar, the ego stops questioning it. It sounds like self-knowledge. It sounds like honesty. It sounds, above all, like her. So the voice is not random noise. It is a figure with a personality, feeding from a room full of denied material, organized around an old wound into something that has almost the weight of a separate self. That is what was happening at 3 a.m. That is the structure underneath what she could not name. But knowing the structure does not yet answer the question underneath the question. Not just what the voice is, but why it is so specifically, so surgically, so relentlessly mean. It is mean because cruelty is efficient. That is the mechanism, and it takes a moment to sit with. The voice did not become cruel by accident, and it did not become cruel because something inside you is fundamentally broken. It became cruel because, a long time ago, cruelty worked. It stopped you, and stopping you was the only goal it had. To understand how that happened, you have to go back to what got buried in the first place, because the inner figure does not form from nothing. It forms from everything that had to be locked away in order to survive the particular household, the particular school, the particular set of adults who shaped the early world. An archetype is a pattern built into every human mind before any individual experience shapes it. The way all rivers carve similar beds through stone, regardless of the continent. The inner critic is one of those carved beds. Every culture has a story for it. Every person inherits its shape. But the specific voice, the exact words, the precise pitch of contempt, that part is personal. That part was cut to fit. Think about a boy who was punished, not dramatically, but consistently, for softness, for crying past a certain age, for wanting comfort when comfort was treated as weakness. He does not disappear those feelings. He cannot. But he learns to push them down, and what he pushes down does not evaporate. It collects in the shadow, in the locked room, and it grows in the dark. Then, years later, when he is an adult trying to tell someone he loves that he is scared or that he needs something, there is a voice that rises before the words can form. It tells him he is pathetic, that he is making something out of nothing, that any person who saw what he actually felt inside would leave. The demoralizing inner voice, that cold presence that drains the color from things, is not a stranger to him. It is made of his own suppressed feeling life, turned inside out, now speaking to him in the exact language that was used to shut him down when he was small. The feeling life he buried grew a critic who does to him now what was done to him then. The same mechanism runs in the other direction. Think about a girl who learned that confidence was dangerous, not because anyone told her so in those words, but because every time she was bold or ambitious or loud in her certainty, something contracted around her. A look, a withdrawal, a comment with an edge to it. She learned to make herself smaller, and she buried the assertiveness that made rooms go cold. But it did not disappear. It returned as a contemptuous inner voice that intercepts every achievement before she can reach it. She finishes something she worked hard on, and before the satisfaction can land, the voice is already there with its verdict. Who do you think you are? It does not let her rest in what she made. It tears it down the moment she gets close to it, and she has spent years believing this is simply her honest self-assessment, the cold interior truth that other people are too kind or too polite to confirm. But this is the part that changes everything once you see it. The voice does not tear things down because it wants her to fail. It tears things down because it is trying to protect her from something it believes is worse than failure. This is the saboteur move, and it is the most counterintuitive piece of the whole mechanism. The inner figure, the one that condemns, that belittles, that demolishes before the demolishing can come from outside, is not acting as an enemy. It is acting as a very old, very frightened guardian running on intelligence that has not been updated in decades. The logic, from inside the mechanism, is airtight. If she never lets herself fully want the thing, she cannot be devastated when it is taken. If she ruins the good relationship before it can disappoint her, and it will disappoint her, the voice is certain of this, then she is the one who chose to leave rather than the one who was left. The familiar misery of nothing ever changing is not nothing. It is a known quantity. It has edges she can feel in the dark. The terror of something actually working, of actually having what she wants and then losing it, that terror has no bottom. The voice knows this. The voice has been keeping her away from that bottomless place since she was young enough to first glimpse it. What feels like cruelty from the outside is, from the inside of the mechanism, a kind of desperate protection. This is why the complex does not argue. Arguments imply a willingness to be wrong. A guardian does not argue. It acts. It reaches for the fastest tool available, and the fastest tool for stopping a person from moving towards something dangerous is not a measured cost-benefit analysis. It is contempt. Contempt lands before reasoning can organize. Contempt does not require a response. By the time she has felt the sting of it and begun to contract back into familiar territory, the move is already done. She is safe, in the only way the voice knows how to make her safe, which is still, unexposed, back behind the line. There is a story about a boy who, at 7 years old, saw a small bearded figure. The figure kept appearing, kept moving closer, until one day the boy stabbed his sister. That act had nothing to do with his sister. It had been growing for years in the basement of his awareness, a personification of something that had never been spoken to, never been given any other outlet, until it moved through him in a way that destroyed everything around it. The figure was not the cause of the violence in that single moment. The figure was the years of accumulation finally given a face. What was locked away had organized. It had found a shape, and it used the fastest, most extreme tool available to force the crisis that silence had been forestalling. Most people never approach that extreme, but the mechanism underneath it runs in every person who has ever had a voice arrive at 3 in the morning with a completed verdict. The inner figure learned the shape of the old wound. It took on the specific language of whatever authority first confirmed that she was too much, or not enough, or dangerous in her wanting. It became a gatekeeper whose whole purpose is to make sure she never moves far enough forward that the old wound can be reopened in its worst form. And it does this at the price of everything she actually wants, every relationship she could have, everything she could make, every version of herself that might have gotten to exist if the guardian had been working on better information. The voice sounds mean because it learned that cruelty was the fastest way to stop her from moving toward what it feared most. It is not dispensing cruelty for the pleasure of it. It is deploying it like a tool. It knows exactly how much contempt is required to make her retreat, because it has been calibrating that measurement for as long as she has been alive. Understanding this does not make the voice go quiet. It does not dissolve the mechanism, just to see it clearly. She will still lie awake at 3 in the morning. The pronouncements will still arrive. The question of what can actually be done, whether a guardian running on 40-year-old intelligence can be reached, and how, and whether it can ever be turned, that question is still entirely open. It can be reached, but reaching it requires doing something the voice has successfully prevented for years, treating it as a voice rather than as the truth. The first move is separation, and it is smaller than it sounds. When the pronouncement arrives, nothing will change. You are hopeless. They will leave. You do not argue with the content. Arguing with the content is the trap. The moment you start building your case for why you are not, in fact, hopeless, you have already accepted the terms of the courtroom. You are standing in the dock, and the voice is the judge, and the proceeding is already underway on its terms. Do not do that. Instead, step back one level and name what is happening. Internally, quietly, say, "That is a voice. It is not me." Name its quality, the way you would name a weather system moving through. That is the one that tells me I am hopeless. That is the one that says they will leave. You are not agreeing or disagreeing with its verdict. You are simply noticing that something has arrived, that it has a particular shape, and that its shape is familiar. This is not the same as being its thoughts. A person standing at a window watching rainfall is not the rain. You can hear the voice without being the voice. The distinction is tiny, and it is everything. The reason this matters is that the voice has survived for so long precisely because it has never been seen as separate. It has been treated as the interior monologue, as the honest assessment, as simply what is true when the noise drops away. The moment it becomes a voice, a thing that speaks, rather than a thing that is, something shifts. Not permanently, not all at once, but it shifts, because you have now named it, and naming a thing changes your relationship to it. The boy who could not articulate what the small figure wanted, who could only feel it pressing toward him, the moment he could say blame, even tentatively, something cracked open. The name does not destroy the figure, it just makes the figure visible enough to address. The second move is dialogue. This is where it gets stranger, and you have to be willing to let it be strange. After you have separated from the voice, after you have said, "That is not me speaking," you turn toward it, not to fight it, to ask it a question. The question is, what are you afraid will happen if I try? You can do this in writing, in a journal, on a scrap of paper. Give the voice a place on the page and let it answer. You can do it in silence, in the few minutes before you get out of bed in the morning, asking inward and waiting. The answer may sound absurd. It may sound like something a child would say. That is not a sign that it is not true. It is a sign that the voice formed before you had adult language for it, and it is still speaking from that earlier time. It may say something like, "Because if you try and fail, everyone will know what you really are." Or, "Because the one time you let yourself want something this much, you lost it, and it almost ended you." The logic will be the logic of an old wound that organized into a point of view a long time ago, and has not updated since. But the logic will be there. Listen for it, without arguing with it. You are not trying to win this exchange. You are trying to find out what the voice thinks it is guarding. One woman who did this work came to understand that her inner voice, the cold, certain one that intercepted every achievement, was terrified of visibility, not failure. Visibility, being seen succeeding was, to something deep in her, more dangerous than failing quietly, because she had once been seen succeeding by someone whose approval mattered enormously, and what followed was not praise, but resentment, and the resentment had felt like annihilation. The voice had learned, stay small, stay invisible. Nothing you make will protect you from what happens when people see you making it. Once she heard that, she stopped arguing with the content of the voice's verdicts. She started talking to the fear underneath them. The third move is negotiation, and this is where the transformation becomes possible. Once you know what the voice is protecting, you can offer it a different assignment. The same part of you that says you will fail in front of everyone is already deeply invested in the outcome. It already cares, ferociously, about whether you are embarrassed, exposed, diminished. That care is not nothing. It is a kind of fierce attention. The question is what you aim it at. Instead of letting it aim at destruction, tearing down what you make before anyone else can, you redirect it toward genuine quality. You say to it, internally or in writing, I hear what you are protecting. I do not want to be exposed either. So instead of stopping me, help me make this good enough to stand behind. Help me hold to my actual standard rather than shrinking below it to stay safe. The dream that showed veiled intruders in a woman's house and then revealed them as disguised artists. That is the movement this negotiation makes possible. The tormenting figures were not dispensed with. They were recognized. Their cruelty was not the root of what they were. It was what creativity looks like when it has been locked in a basement for 20 years and has no other way to force attention. The moment they were seen as carrying something that belonged to her, they stopped needing to break in. The energy that had been driving the inner assault became available for what it had always been trying, in its distorted way, to do. Projection is what happens when an inner quality gets thrown outward onto someone else, the way a film projector casts an image onto the wall. When the inner critic's voice is completely unexamined, it does not stay inside. It gets projected onto the people closest to you, and suddenly, they are the ones who are always criticizing you. The colleague who seems dismissive, the partner who seems to be waiting for you to fail. You are not making these perceptions up entirely, but you are painting with a very loaded brush, and some of what you see in them is the unowned voice looking for a body to inhabit. When the negotiation begins to work, the projection loosens. You stop needing to find the critic outside yourself because you've begun to reclaim what it was carrying. This is where the self becomes relevant. Not the everyday managing self, but the deeper intelligence that drives you toward wholeness, even when you cannot see where you are going. The self is what the inner figure, once transformed, begins to point toward. The cold, condemning voice, once it has been heard and redirected, does not become cheerful or uncritical. It becomes precise. It holds a standard. It is the part of you that will not accept hollow approval or work you do not believe in. And that is not a small thing. That is the part of you that knows the difference between what is real and what is performed. That is the part that, when it is working correctly, does not let you off the hook for less than you are capable of. Not to humiliate you, but because it knows what you are capable of. None of this happens in a single conversation. The voice will return. You will wake at 3 a.m. and it will be there again, with its completed verdicts, its cold, impersonal certainty, its preferred words, never, always, hopeless. That is not a failure of the work. That is the nature of what you are dealing with. A figure that has had decades to establish itself will not simply step aside because you named it once. But next time it speaks, something has changed. You know what it sounds like. You know the quality of the voice, the shape of its pronouncements, the hour it prefers. You know the fear underneath the cruelty. You know that it is not you. And knowing its name is not the end of the relationship. It is the beginning of a different one. One in which you are no longer only listening, but also speaking back. The question is not whether the voice will come for you again. It will. The question is what you do in the moment between hearing it and believing it. That moment, the one between hearing and believing, is where the whole of this work lives. Not in the silence before the voice arrives, not in the peace after it finally retreats, but in that narrow gap where you are still yourself and the verdict has not yet become your thought. Everything that was covered here today was pointing at that gap. How the voice formed, what old wound organized it into a standing posture, what mandate it has been operating under without your consent. Not because understanding it makes it stop. It will not stop. But because understanding it changes what you do when it speaks. The arc of all of this is not transformation from a person who has a harsh inner critic into a person who does not. That is not what becomes available. What becomes available is a shift in the relationship, from one in which the voice runs unexamined, issuing verdicts you accept as facts, to one in which you know what you are dealing with. You know it has a shape. You know what it is protecting. You know that underneath its cruelty, there is something that cares enormously about your survival, about your dignity, about whether you are exposed, and that this caring, misdirected for years, is not the enemy. It is the raw material of something more useful. The inner figure that has been tearing your work down before anyone else could is the same figure that once heard and redirected will hold a standard no easy approval can satisfy. That is not a small thing to have on your side. The work is patient, and it is not finished in one sitting. But the direction of it is clear. Not silence, not defeat, not negotiation into compliance. Accountability, a different kind of relationship, built slowly, where the voice that once condemned you becomes the one that will not let you betray yourself. And so, the woman at 3 a.m, the voice arrives, as it always does, with its completed inventory of her failures, its familiar certainty, its preferred hour. But this time, she does not reach for an argument. She does not go cold trying to outlast it. She simply sets it down beside her on the bed, the way you might set down something heavy that has been in your hands a long time. Not thrown away, not ignored, just placed down, with enough space around it to see what it actually is. And in that space, something she could not have predicted, not silence, but the beginning of a conversation she is finally ready to have.